So analyzing a multifamily apartment deal, this is really your next step in building wealth and accumulating assets. You have to learn what the actual cash flow is before you even know how much money that this property makes or doesn't make in many cases, right? So the first number we want to look at, regardless of purchase price, what we really should talk about today is above 4 units in real estate. Because when you get above 4 units, you're in the commercial span, and commercial properties are evaluated based on the income that they produce. The rough valuation that you should know is that the value of that property is the income that it makes, called the net operating income, NOI. We'll talk about how we get to that in a second. That divided by that area's cap rate. The area's cap rate, people think that's like a rate of return. It's not. It's the measure stability of that area. So, for instance, in Boston, Massachusetts, where everybody wants to be and there's really no vacancies ever, the cap rate in Boston is between 2 and 4%. Now, that means it's a very stable place to live. If you go to a rural town in like Alabama and you're looking at a mobile home park, for instance, that might have a cap rate of 12%, which means there's not a lot of people maybe that are looking for that specific place to live. There might be some high crime, but the returns are higher because you're paying less for the property. So because properties use their income to determine their valuation, it's really, really important that we get the actual income by that property. So you won't believe this, but a lot of times sellers actually will lie about their net operating income, right? They're going to overstate their income and they're going to understate their expenses. It's what they do because they're trying to get a higher value for their property. So it's imperative to learn how to come across that net operating income. First, we're going to start at what the gross income is. Now, gross income would be if all of the units were all rented out at their current rents, how much does that actually equal, right? So you lay all that out. So for instance, if it's a 10-unit building and they're all paying $1,000 a month, you're looking at $10,000 a month or $120,000 a year. You want to use annual figures here. After you have that $120,000, you want to take out a couple things. You want to find out what the area's vacancy rate is. You can find that by going to other property managers in the area and literally asking them, hey, what's the occupancy rate or what's the vacancy rate for your portfolio right now in this area? If you go to an area where there's a really small vacancy, like 2 or 1 or 0%, you still want to use 5% as your minimums in this market. We try to use 10% for our vacancy rates. That gives you your effective gross income after you take your vacancy out, and then after you add in other little add-ins like laundry or parking or storage. So if you add those other income pieces, you have your gross potential income minus your vacancies plus your laundry, parking, storage, other incomes. That equals your effective gross income at the bottom of that. Once you have your effective gross income, now here comes the fun part. Now, sellers love to lie about their expenses. What we have found in multifamily is that typically you're going to have between a 40 and 50% expense ratio. That means if you add up all these expenses, which we're about to go over, you're going to have about 50% of the income taken out in expenses. So as a quick little data analysis, right, if you're looking at a property and sellers just rattling off numbers to you over the phone, if you have an effective manager or if you run an effective management company, you can actually take 50% of that income, and that would be almost your net operating income that you could then divide by the cap rate to get the rough valuation. So as we go down this example, we're at $120,000 and now let's say we're at $100,000 for effective gross income. Now we have to take out our expenses, and here they come. We have taxes, we have insurance, we have repairs and maintenance. If you're in the Northeast, we got a snow plowing bill. We got lots of snow here in the Northeast for anybody who wants to have that action. We budget like $75 to $80 per 3 inches of snow because that's a huge liability issue as well, right? You get a whole bunch of snow and your tenant trips and falls on your steps outside. Guess who's responsible for that? So you want to make sure that you have someone that takes care of plowing the driveways and helps out with the shoveling and sanding of your walkways and your steps. It's a big deal. And they have to be licensed and insured, which is why it's sometimes a little more pricey. In addition to snow plowing and landscaping, you have pest control. Even for really good properties that don't have those pests, you kind of want someone there to always check at least quarterly, coming in and treating the problem areas, like your basements, and sometimes you have some kitchens and things of that you want to treat. Then we go into utilities. Now, utilities is kind of a crapshoot, right? You have your water and sewer. So depending on if the property is on well, right, like a private well, right, and private sewage, like a septic tank, that's one thing you have to consider. And how long is that septic tank going to last before you have to invest in another tank, which can sometimes be, especially up here, $20,000, $30,000 sometimes. If it's a big property, you're talking 60 to 80,000. If it's on city water or sewer, that's great. Collect the bills. You can usually contact the local municipality, right, the water department, and you can gather those bills from what the seller was paying for the last 12 months. That'll give you a good idea, because that's usually billed quarterly, what that property is doing for water and sewer bills. You'll also have trash removal. Trash removal in some places is pretty expensive. You have to have a huge dumpster, and they're not taking care of it, so you have to have someone kind of overseeing, depending on your management and what you're doing for your tenants, right? Now, when you get that waste management bill, right, take that with a grain of salt or whatever the seller has disclosed, because even if the seller says, oh, the city takes care of all this trash, we've got the barrels and all that stuff already laid out, they just take it you never know when they're going to have big mattresses or pieces of furniture out there, and the city starts to get at you for citations because you, as a landlord, didn't get your right sticker, or you can't leave this stuff out there. You have to build a trash port now with that little overhang, right? Like, you don't know. So you have to take all that into consideration when looking at the waste management system. Another utility, electric and gas. Who pays the utilities is a really big deal in multifamily real estate. If the landlord's paying the utilities, like they're covering, if there's one heating unit and they're paying the heat for the entire building, you're going to be more on that 50 to 55% side expense to income ratio. You're going to have like a 50% expense ratio or 55% if they're paying all the electric and the gas on these units, depending on what you use for your fuel source. Same goes if you're in the southern states and the landlord's paying all of the AC costs. You know that those can spike electrical like you wouldn't believe. So you want to make sure that you know who's paying the electric, who's paying the gas. When we're going through a unit, and that's a whole other talk for another day, that's a due diligence talk, but we actually verify when we go unit to unit what the heating source is, what the cooling source is, and who pays what. And the tenant agrees, yes, landlord's paying this, or no, I'm paying that. And if there's a conflict, we want to work that out before we close on the deal. And one of the last things that we figure after we go through everything, the taxes, the insurance, the pest control, the landscaping, the snow blowing, the repairs and maintenance, the management fees, the utilities, the waste and trash removal. Then we want to go down into professional fees. You're like, what professional fees? It's like a 6 or 12 or 100 unit building. Well, there are professional fees associated. Number one, you're going to have to bookkeep for this, right? You're going to have either an accountant or a software that helps you keep track of the rents and expenses for this property. You're also going to have probably an attorney that you work with that's going to help you with the tough evictions. Now, sometimes you can have your management company do all that in-house, but even that is going to be a fee, right? But you sometimes might have to get a constable or an attorney involved. Those are your professional fees that you want to make sure those are taken out every year. Speaking of professional fees, let's go to payroll. Are you buying a 160-unit building that needs staff on site? A property manager that is literally devoted to that one property and shows up and goes to work every day? Or a full-time maintenance tech? All of these are payroll. You want to make sure that's included in your numbers as well if you're buying a bigger unit, especially for something like that. And lastly, you want to make sure you put a management fee in your expenses. You're going to be like, no, I'm going to manage it myself. Great, fantastic. But the bank is still going to have a management fee in there, and chances are you're going to have to use this underwriting sheet or your spreadsheet and take that to the bank, and they're going to use that to determine whether or not they're going to loan to you on the property or not. They want a management fee in there because in case you do default, they want to take over the property and they're going to have to hire a management company to oversee that property. We use by default a 10% management fee, and typically in the markets we have and how many units we have, we can get better deals than that, 8%, sometimes 6% in each market. But you should always be conservative in your initial Excel sheet to know if this is going to work or not. So put 10% in there for the management fee. So repairs and maintenance is going to be your biggest line item by far. Now, the amount you're going to budget for repairs and maintenance is going to vary by how old your buildings are and kind of what class your buildings are in. So there's Class A, Class B, Class C, and Class D properties. We like to stay in that Class B and Class C. Class A is properties that were built in the last 5 years. and they're usually filled with like executives or transient folks. They have a lot of amenities. And while they do only stay for like 6 to 10 to 12 months, because usually they're on work purposes or whatever they're there for, there's still less maintenance to be looked at because they don't really trash their units, and it's a 5-year-old building. There's not a lot to be had. Class B and C is where we like to play. The cash flow is a little bit better. You get a better price for the buildings, and your tenant quality is still pretty on par, right? But repairs and maintenance, you're going to want to budget, depending on how old that building is, between like $600 a unit per year to like $1,500 per unit per year, depending on how old the building is, and if you're going to do a whole bunch of CapEx or not before you take it over. Once we go through all of this stuff and everything that's been disclosed to us by the seller and stuff that has not been disclosed to us by the seller, that's where you got to fill in, right? Then we go to capital expenditures, or what we call CapEx. CapEx is not technically an expense, but it's money that you want to withhold every single month from those rents to budget for those bigger items. So bigger items being the roof, or the heating units, right? Or the AC units, or common area carpet, common stairways, and the trim work, like bigger projects that you want to make sure you have the money set aside for. The minimum number you want to budget for the capital expenditures is like $300 per unit per year. And that's still not that much money, especially if your roof only has 3 to 5 years left on it, or your heating unit, or whatever you have. You want to make sure that you get a licensed inspector in there or contractors to tell you exactly what things will cost and how much more time is left in them. Okay, now that we've finished going through all the income, right, your gross potential income, less your vacancy, less your collection vacancy, you have economic vacancy, which people aren't paying, but they're supposed to be paying you. So you have your gross potential minus your physical vacancy minus your economic vacancy. You can set those at 2.5 or 5% each, or 10% each, depending on your market. Call those property managers. Then you add in your other income, your laundry, your parking, your storage, and then you have your effective gross income. Then you're backing out all of these expenses that the seller either did or didn't tell you about. And if they didn't tell you about, you're going back to that broker or back to that seller and saying, hey, noticed you didn't mention anything for landscaping. Who do you have doing landscaping? Oh, I do it. Great. But you know to put your own budget in for it, because you don't want to be doing the landscaping because you have better things to do with your time. $1 per hour. See the REI ladder video. So you go through all those expenses, and then you're left at the very bottom, and you take out your CapEx, right? And you're left with net operating income. So if your net operating income is about $100,000, and you know that it's about a 7 cap where you are, the properties are trading at roughly a 7 cap, which is the measurement of the area, $100,000 divided by 0.07 is just over $1.4 million. So that's how you know what that property is worth based on that cap rate. So that's valuing the multifamily, but you're still not at that magical number called cash flow. And I'll tell you why. Because you have your net operating income, but there's a very important piece you haven't taken out of the equation yet. What about your mortgage? What about your mortgage, right? So depending on where you get debt from, you can get debt anywhere, and at this particular video, between 5 and 8%. Rates are on the rise. You have to be careful with that. But for right now, you take your net operating income and you subtract out what your annual debt service is. Now, that will finally give you your ultimate cash flow. Cash flow is your net operating income minus your debt service. That could be a first mortgage, could be a second mortgage, could be if you have investor capitals, like wherever you're taking that money from, you have to pay back some sort of interest rate. So all of that taken out, you're finally given your cash flow. Cash flow for that property can then be divvied up amongst partners, can be divvied up amongst you and whoever else you have involved in that project, if you're syndicating, or if it's just by yourself. That's the magical number. That cash flow number goes directly to your passive income line. Well, we talked about it's not passive, right? Goes directly to your income line of where you're not working as hard for your money as your earned income, which is your day-to-day activities. So congratulations. If it meets that number for you, whatever that number is that you have set for your own goal, I want $200 per unit per month in net cash flow, or I want $50 per month per unit in net cash flow, or I want $500 per unit per month in net cash flow. If it meets that number, when you put it through the Excel sheet, You pull the trigger, you make the offer, right? And you tell the broker, you tell the seller, hey, Mr. Seller, hey, Mr. Broker. So because of what I need or we need or my team needs to make this work, here's roughly where the purchase price has to be in order for me to make my numbers work. And I know you didn't mention to me about the waste management. We didn't really talk about trash. We didn't really talk about electrical or, water, sewer. But here's the numbers that, myself and my lender and my partner or in my debt, they have to fill these numbers in to even get a loan on the property. So this, Mr. Seller, that's why I have to use all these numbers for the expenses. And that's why we're offering what we're offering. In another video later, we'll talk about how to use creative financing and how to discuss when it's appropriate and how to talk to the sellers on that. But for right now, if you're not yet part of our Real Estate Investors Ignition community yet, make sure you head on over to reiignition.com and join our community. It's $1,000 a year or $97 a month. We have live coachings every single Wednesday, noon Eastern Standard Time, and we have access to a whole bunch of digital assets in there, like our multifamily spreadsheet. Thank you so much for watching that whole video. We just did the multifamily analysis of 5+ units and what to look for when you're evaluating something like that. Know you have a lot of content coming at you from all angles, so we appreciate watching the entire video. If that interested you and you want a copy of that Excel sheet, make sure you check out our Ignition community. We are a bunch of go-givers in there, and we're always looking to try to get everyone else to that next level. We have live coachings every Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern Standard. They're all posted for you right there. And if you go to reiignition.com, you'll see what it's all about at that link. For the rest of the videos, we're putting out lots of stuff, both real estate and not real estate related. We believe in life meeting real estate, using real estate as the tool to a better life. Be sure to keep following and sharing and checking out all of the social handles. They're all tagged here below. And we'll see you in the next video.